Charlotte and Tim Claydon, both aged 34, also faced a fertility nightmare. From the age of 15, Charlotte had suffered from painful, heavy periods and had been diagnosed with endometriosis. This is a chronic disease where the tissue which lines the uterus is found elsewhere in the body, making it difficult to conceive. Charlotte was given various drugs to treat the condition and was fortunate enough to become pregnant with her son Thomas, who's now 7 years old. But it was when the couple decided to extend their family that their problems really began.
We kind of enjoyed Thomas really and didn't think about things too much. And then when he started to get sort of 18 months, 2 years old, we thought we'd really like another one.
I didn't want Thomas to be an only child, and it was something that was quite important to me. That's when our quest for another child sort of started, really.
After conceiving so quickly with Thomas, the couple just assumed Charlotte would easily become pregnant again, but they were sadly mistaken. After 2 years of trying, Charlotte still hadn't conceived. Her periods were very painful and had become erratic.
My cycles by then were sort of 70 to 90 days apart. And, you know, when you're trying for a baby and you're only getting a period once every 3 months, you kind of really feel that your windows of opportunity are being fairly decreased.
The couple were advised to move on to intrauterine insemination, or IUI, which involves the direct placing of washed and prepared sperm inside the cavity of the womb around the time of ovulation. They were optimistic that this time it would work.
Sperm goes back in you and you're then left there for 2 weeks. And you, at that stage, because you know, the egg and the sperm are there, you get to the stage almost where you feel like you're imagining pregnancy symptoms.
I was convinced, you were convinced, and then when it didn't work, we just couldn't believe it. And we were really upset, weren't we? Really upset.
Sadly, 6 more attempts at IUI all failed. By this time, Charlotte was 32 and their son Thomas was 5. The couple began to wonder whether they'd ever be able to have another child. At this point, Charlotte was referred to the consultant Lawrence Mascarenhas, who discovered the reason why Charlotte was having problems conceiving.
She had a condition called polycystic ovaries, which means basically that you don't ovulate regularly, and there is a relative excess of the male hormone testosterone.
Mr. Mascarenhas decided to perform a procedure on Charlotte called ovarian drilling. This is where small holes are punctured through the ovaries.
The drilling of the ovaries might reduce the amount of testosterone, the male hormone, which is inhibiting ovulation. So by reducing testosterone, ovulation takes off again and then they conceive.
Charlotte's periods did become more regular after the operation, but their hopes were dashed when 3 more attempts at IUI failed. The couple were advised to move on to IVF. Then, unfortunately, Charlotte developed ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, a life-threatening complication caused by an overreaction to the hormones used during the IVF process. Charlotte was in severe pain with abdominal swelling.
Couldn't even move from the bedroom, as in you were bedridden, weren't you, really, for several days?
I think my stomach was bigger than when I was 6 months pregnant.
The severe symptoms began to subside. This was because Charlotte wasn't pregnant. The treatment had failed.
And I can remember my mum saying to me, please, will you just give up? You have to give up. You have a wonderful child and a husband who love you dearly, and I am scared that you are going to kill yourself in your quest for another child.
But Charlotte and Tim weren't prepared to give up yet, and what they didn't realise was that they were about to meet someone who might be able to help. Charlotte and Tim Claydon know only too well what an emotional rollercoaster fertility treatment can be. Getting a sibling for their first child, Thomas, had become an obsession. After 10 traumatic failed attempts at intrauterine insemination, they hoped IVF would bring them the second child they longed for. But they were devastated when IVF failed. Then Charlotte came across an article in a magazine about how acupuncture could help in fertility. She decided she had nothing to lose.
And I can remember ringing and being said, it's £95. I remember thinking, God, that's a lot of money. At that time, you relate everything into how much IVF drugs it would buy you. And I can remember thinking that the initial consultation would buy me 1 night's worth of injections.
I did think it was a bit of a rip-off, really, preying on women that are desperate, and I honestly didn't think, other than making her relax, it would have any real benefit.
But undeterred, Charlotte went to see Gerad Kite, who practices 5-element acupuncture, a form of therapy that originated in China more than 2,000 years ago. Gerad believes physical ailments are usually caused by emotional stress, even infertility. Charlotte had suffered from very painful heavy periods since the age of 15, and Gerad thought he could help.
So Charlotte had gone through all these different procedures, but no one had dealt with her periods. So as far as I was concerned, for me, success for getting pregnant would be to see her menstrual cycle regulate.
Gerad Kite's method is based on the 5 elements which relate to the 5 emotions in humans. He concluded that Charlotte's sign is wood, the sign of anger. His aim was to achieve balance so Charlotte would be at her optimum functioning level as a human being and therefore more receptive to getting pregnant.
This first period after 3 sessions of treatment with him just started. I was in the garden, just started, was completely pain-free and didn't have a single clot in it.
Charlotte went back the following week for her next treatment. Then something very bizarre happened.
I woke up the next morning and I had started leaking milk from my breasts. My nightie was just soaked, wasn't it? I can remember saying to Tim, "Oh my God, what is happening to me? Look."
2 significant changes happened that suggested to me that she would conceive quickly. A, her menstrual cycle regulated almost immediately, and she reported having the first pain-free period ever and a proper bleed. Secondly, spontaneously she started secreting milk from her breasts, which is an increase in prolactin levels, but as far as I was concerned, this was a definite shift hormonally.
Charlotte was convinced the changes she was experiencing weren't just psychological. Even sceptic Tim was starting to view acupuncture differently.
I cannot possibly make milk leak out of my breasts, and having had 20-odd years worth of painful heavy periods, I can't possibly psychologically stop that either. And you can physically see that is happening.
I couldn't believe it because I honestly thought it was just a few pins that just make you feel a bit better in the back. That's my understanding at that point of what acupuncture was, and suddenly this was happening to her body and it was just unbelievable.
At her next session, Gerad told Charlotte she was ovulating and to go home and have lots of sex.
I went back to see him 10 days later, and I can remember him saying to me, "When you get home, I want you to do a pregnancy test." And I was like, "But my period isn't even due for another 2 days." And he was like, "No, when you go home, I want you to do a pregnancy test because I think you might be pregnant."
After 5 years of infertility and heartache, could acupuncture help where IVF had failed? The acupuncturist Gerad Kite had told Charlotte he thought she might be pregnant. 2 days before the couple were due to start their second round of IVF, Charlotte bought a pregnancy test, never expecting it to be positive.
And I went back into the bathroom 10 minutes later and there was 2 blue lines on this pregnancy test. And of course, bearing in mind that, where you spent 5 years weeing on sticks every month to see whether you're pregnant or not, you then see 2 blue lines and you think, that must be faulty.
We just couldn't believe it, could we? After everything we've been through, literally a matter of weeks acupuncture, and here we were with a positive result.
After a 5-year struggle, Charlotte and Tim eventually had their miracle baby, Max. Gerad Kite believes that having a second baby had become an obsession for Charlotte, and that once she relaxed through acupuncture, she was able to get pregnant.
He loves that, doesn't he?
The irony is, as soon as you drop that idea that happiness will be from finding a child, then you feel better anyway, and then you're more likely to conceive.
Obviously, the effects that I had had from the ovarian drilling, etc., etc., had probably given Gerad better grounds to work from. But at the end of the day, we both firmly and utterly believe that that pregnancy was completely and utterly down due to the effects of acupuncture. Looking back on it now, this was obviously just the way it was meant to be, and yeah, we feel incredibly lucky to have him, and just he's a really special little boy.